My name is Harper Rodriguez. I'm 34 years old, and I'm about to tell you the story of how one uninvited wedding appearance changed everything between me and my family forever. Before I reveal what happened when I stepped out of that gleaming Rolls Royce at St. Margaret's Cathedral, let me take you back to where this all began. Because what I discovered 3 days before my sister's wedding would shake our family to its very core. It was a Tuesday morning in October when I found the mysterious envelope slipped under my apartment door in downtown Chicago. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note that would unravel 20 years of family lies. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with the phone call that should have been my sister Emma's wedding invitation, but instead became the moment I realized just how little my own family thought of me. Harper, I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to take it the wrong way. Emma's voice was hesitant on the other end of the line. I was sitting in my corner office at Morrison & Associates, where I'd just made partner in corporate. Law at 34. Younger than anyone in the firm's history. Outside my window, Lake Michigan stretched endlessly, but I barely noticed the view as my sister's words hit me like ice water. Have you ever experienced being excluded from a major family event by people who claim to love you? Have you felt that crushing realization that you're not as important to your family as you thought? I'd love to hear about similar situations in the comments. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps us process the pain. The wedding is going to be intimate, just close family and friends. Mom and Dad think it would be better if you didn't come. They're worried about you causing a scene or making it about yourself. You know how you can be. Emma's words tumbled out in a rush, each one a small knife to my heart. How I could be. I'd spent my entire adult life being the responsible one, the achiever, the daughter who never caused problems. While Emma bounced from job to job and relationship to relationship, I'd built a successful career, owned my own condo in River North, maintained a spotless reputation in Chicago's legal community, and never once asked my family for financial help. Yet somehow I was the one who might cause a scene. What do you mean, how I can be? I asked, my voice carefully controlled despite the rage building in my chest like a storm gathering strength. Well, you always have to be the center of attention, and with your situation with Marcus ending so badly, Mom thought it might be awkward. Plus, you tend to get jealous when good things happen to other people. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus and I had ended our engagement 6 months earlier, when I discovered he'd been seeing his secretary for 8 months of our 2-year relationship. But somehow, in my family's twisted narrative, I was the problem, because I'd called off the wedding instead of quietly accepting his betrayal like some kind of doormat. Emma, I've never once made anything about myself at family events. I've supported you through every crisis, every breakup, every job loss. I helped you pay rent last year when you were between positions, remember? I covered your car payment. For 3 months when you got fired from that marketing job, my voice was steady, but my hands were shaking with the effort to maintain composure. I know, but this is different. This is my wedding day, and I need it to be perfect. Jonathan's family is very traditional, very proper. They're flying in from Connecticut, and his father is some big-shot investment banker on Wall Street. His mother went to Vassar and sits on charity boards. I can't have any drama or family dysfunction on display. Jonathan Whitmore. My sister's fiancé of exactly 8 months, who'd swept her off her feet with expensive dinners at Alinea and Girl and the Goat, weekend trips to the Hamptons in his supposed private jet, and promises of a fairy tale life funded by old Connecticut money. Emma had been gushing about his wealth for months. His family's estate in Greenwich, his prestigious job at Goldman Sachs, his Harvard MBA. She'd shown me photos of the silver Rolls Royce he'd apparently bought her as an engagement gift, the 5-carat diamond ring that cost more than most people's houses, the custom Vera Wang dress he'd purchased for their honeymoon in Tuscany. So this is about impressing his family? I asked, my voice getting colder with each word. Partly, yes, but it's also about protecting my special day. You understand, don't you? You'll find someone else, Harper. You'll have your own wedding someday, and when you do, I'll be there to support you. But this day needs to be about me and Jonathan. About our perfect beginning. Perfect beginning. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been so painful. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring at the Chicago skyline, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. My own sister had uninvited me from her wedding because they thought I was too much of a liability to be around her new wealthy in-laws. My parents had apparently agreed that I was such a problem child that my mere presence would somehow ruin Emma's special day. That evening, I called my mother to try to understand their reasoning, hoping maybe there had been some miscommunication or that Emma had misrepresented their position. Mom picked up on the third ring, her voice immediately defensive when she heard mine, like she'd been preparing for this conversation and dreading it. "Harper, Emma told me she spoke with you. I hope you're not calling to argue about this decision." "Mom, I just want to understand why I'm not welcome at my own sister's wedding. What have I done to deserve being excluded from one of the most important days in our family?" There was a long pause, filled with the kind of silence that precedes disappointing truths. When she spoke again, her voice had that familiar edge of disappointment that had followed me through most of my childhood, the tone that suggested I was once again failing to understand something obvious. "Honey, you know how you get at family events. You always find a way to make things about yourself, even when you don't mean to. Remember Thanksgiving 2 years ago when you announced your promotion to senior associate right during Dad's birthday toast? Or Christmas when you corrected Uncle Robert about his investment strategy in front of everyone at dinner?" I felt my chest tighten with frustration and old wounds reopening. "Mom, I shared good news about my promotion because Dad specifically asked about my job during the toast. He said he was proud of both his daughters and asked me to tell everyone about my recent success. And Uncle Robert was giving Julie dangerous financial advice about putting her entire inheritance into cryptocurrency. I was trying to help her avoid losing everything. You see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You always have an excuse. Always think you know better than everyone else. Emma deserves one day where she's the star, where everything goes perfectly according to her vision. With your recent breakup and your tendency to overshadow everyone with your achievements, we just think it's better this way." My tendency to overshadow everyone. As if being successful was some kind of character flaw that needed to be managed. As if working 18-hour days to build my career, sacrificing relationships and social life to establish myself in one of Chicago's most competitive law firms was somehow selfish instead of admirable. What about Dad? Does he feel the same way about this? Your father agrees with me completely. We want what's best for Emma and what's best for the family harmony. You'll understand someday when you have your own wedding, when you want everything to be perfect and worry about family members who might complicate things. The conversation ended the same way so many others had throughout my life, with me being painted as the selfish, difficult daughter who couldn't just be happy for others. The daughter who asked too many questions, achieved too much, expected too much recognition for her accomplishments. But what my family didn't know was that I'd already begun to suspect there was more to Emma's fairy tale romance than met the eye. I'd been a corporate lawyer long enough to recognize when something didn't add up, and several things about Jonathan Whitmore had been bothering me for weeks. The way he always paid for expensive dinners in cash, never using credit cards. The fact that his supposed Wall Street job never seemed to require him to work late or travel for business. The expensive gifts that appeared without any logical connection to bonuses or salary cycles. Most tellingly, the way he'd consistently avoided meeting other members of our extended family or longtime family friends who worked in finance and might ask pointed questions about his career. 3 days before the wedding, that mysterious envelope appeared under my door. Inside was a photograph of Jonathan Whitmore getting out of a modest Honda Civic in front of a small apartment building in Queens. The handwritten note was brief but devastating. Thought you should know the truth about your sister's Prince Charming. The Rolls belongs to his uncle's car dealership. He just borrows it for special occasions. The ring is cubic zirconia from a wholesale jewelry supplier in Manhattan's Diamond District. The trust fund is imaginary. He's a part-time insurance salesman living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment. Someone needs to save your family from this lie before it destroys Emma's life. A concerned friend. My hands trembled as I studied the photograph. The man in the picture was definitely Jonathan, but instead of the wealthy investment banker Emma believed she was marrying, he looked like exactly what the note claimed: a struggling salesman trying desperately to keep up appearances. Little did I know that this photograph was just the beginning. What I was about to discover would not only expose Jonathan's elaborate deception, but reveal a family secret that had been buried for over 2 decades. And by the time I walked into that wedding uninvited, I would hold in my hands the power to change everything my family thought they knew about themselves, their finances, and their future. The secret that would change everything was hidden in my late grandmother's jewelry box, which I'd inherited, but never thoroughly examined. That Wednesday night, something about the mysterious note made me dig through her belongings, one more time, searching for answers I couldn't even articulate. What I found there would give me the ammunition I needed, not just to expose Jonathan's lies, but to finally claim my rightful place in this family once and for all. What I discovered in my grandmother's jewelry box that Wednesday night changed everything I thought I knew about my family's history and my place within it. Hidden beneath the velvet lining was a small leather portfolio containing documents that would become my secret weapon. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. First, let me tell you about the phone call I made to verify the truth about Jonathan Whitmore and the investigation that would expose far more than just one man's lies. I hired a private investigator Thursday morning, Marcus Chen from Midwest. Investigations came highly recommended by several colleagues at Morrison & Associates who'd used his services for corporate fraud cases. Within 6 hours, he had confirmed everything in that anonymous note and uncovered details that made Jonathan's deception even more disturbing than I'd imagined. Jonathan Whitmore wasn't just pretending to be wealthy. He was drowning in debt that stretched back years. Credit cards maxed out to their limits, 3 months behind on rent for his Queens studio apartment, student loans in default, and yes, he worked part-time selling insurance policies to seniors at a telemarketing company in Long Island City. The Rolls-Royce belonged to his uncle's luxury car rental business in Midtown, where Jonathan had been borrowing vehicles for special occasions by claiming he was impressing potential high-net-worth insurance clients. The family estate in Connecticut was actually his aunt's modest colonial ranch house that he'd photographed during a family barbecue, carefully cropping out the modest neighborhood and focusing on the one elegant corner of their backyard. But here's what the anonymous note hadn't mentioned. Jonathan was planning to disappear right after the honeymoon. Marcus had discovered airline tickets to Brazil, purchased under the fake name James Morrison, scheduled for the day after Emma and Jonathan were supposed to return from their Tuscany trip. Even more disturbing, he'd found email communications between Jonathan and an unknown accomplice detailing a plan to drug Emma on their wedding night, steal her credit cards and jewelry, clean out whatever bank accounts he could access, and vanish forever with whatever money he could grab. My sister wasn't just about to marry a liar. She was about to become the victim of an elaborate crime that would leave her financially ruined, emotionally devastated, and potentially in physical danger. And my family had decided I was too much of a problem to even witness her destruction, let alone prevent it. That's when I remembered the leather portfolio from grandmother's jewelry box. I'd inherited her jewelry when she died 5 years earlier, but I'd never done more than glance through the obvious pieces. Her pearl necklace, her wedding ring, a few brooches that belonged to an earlier generation. Something about the private investigator's discoveries made me want to dig deeper, to see if there were any other family secrets I'd missed. Inside the portfolio were documents I'd never seen before. Property deeds dating back decades, stock, certificates from companies I'd never heard of, and most importantly, a will dated just 6 months before grandmother's death. A will that had never been submitted to probate court. A will that left her entire estate not to my father, as we'd all believed for the past 5 years, but to me specifically. The amounts were staggering in a way that left me breathless. Grandmother Helen had been far wealthier than any of us knew. The house we thought Dad had inherited through normal succession actually belonged to me, according to legal documents worth over $800,000. The family money that had paid for Emma's college education, her apartment security deposits, her car payments, all of it should have been mine to distribute. The investment portfolio worth over $2 million that had been quietly funding my parents' comfortable retirement was legally mine according to the will's specific language. For 23 years, my family had been living off money that grandmother had specifically left to me. The will was crystal clear in its language and intent. To my granddaughter Harper Rodriguez, who has shown the wisdom, responsibility, and strength of character that this family needs to thrive in future generations, I leave my entire estate, trusting that she will use it to benefit those family members who deserve support and withhold it from those who would squander these resources through poor judgment or lack of initiative. But there was more. Attached to the will was a letter, in grandmother's distinctive handwriting, dated the day before she died. Reading it felt like receiving a message from beyond the grave, a validation of feelings I'd carried for years, but never been able to articulate. My dearest Harper, if you're reading this letter, it means your father has made the choice I feared he would make, to hide my true will and submit the fraudulent document we discussed during my final illness. I knew he would choose the easier path, rather than face the difficult conversations about why Emma wasn't named as my primary beneficiary, rather than acknowledge the differences in character and judgment between my two granddaughters. The letter continued with words that brought tears to my eyes. Your sister has always been careless with money, careless with relationships, careless with the responsibilities that come with being part of this family. But you, my dear Harper, have shown real character from the time you were a small child. You work for what you achieve, you think before you act, you consider the consequences of your choices not just for yourself, but for others. The family has treated you as if your success makes you somehow less deserving of love and recognition, when it should make you more respected and valued. I sat in my living room that Thursday night, surrounded by documents that proved my father had committed probate fraud and my family had been unknowingly living off what should have been my inheritance for over 2 decades. The irony was devastating. They'd excluded me from Emma's wedding because they saw me as the problematic family member, when in reality, I was the only one grandmother had trusted with our family's future. But the letter wasn't finished revealing grandmother's insights. I've watched your parents enable Emma's poor choices while criticizing you for your successes. I've seen them make you feel guilty for achieving more than your sister, as if your accomplishments somehow diminish hers instead of inspiring her to work harder. This inheritance is my way of correcting that imbalance, of ensuring that the person with the best judgment controls the family's financial future. The final paragraph was the most powerful. Use this inheritance to claim your rightful place in this family, Harper. Don't let them diminish you anymore. Don't accept their narrative that you're too much, too ambitious, too successful for your own good. You are exactly what this family needs to survive and thrive. You are the future of the Rodriguez family, not its burden. But I wasn't going to use this information to destroy them. Despite everything they'd done to me, despite years of being made to feel like the difficult daughter, I was going to use grandmother's gift to save Emma from Jonathan's deception and finally force my family to see who I really was. What I didn't know was that my plan to arrive at the wedding uninvited would create a scene more dramatic than anything I could have imagined. Friday morning, I drove to my uncle's luxury car dealership on the north side, the same dealership where Jonathan had been borrowing the Rolls-Royce for his elaborate charade. Uncle Pete, my father's younger brother, had always been the rebel of the family, the one who'd built his own business from nothing while Dad managed grandmother's money and played it safe with conservative investments. When I showed him grandmother's real will and explained the situation with Emma's wedding, his face went through a series of expressions I'll never forget. Holy hell, Harper. You mean Dad's been living off money that was supposed to be yours this whole time? For over 2 decades, Pete. And now Emma's about to marry a con artist who's planning to rob her blind and disappear to South America. Pete was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what I'd just told him. Then a slow smile spread across his weathered face. "So what do you want to do about it?" "I want to borrow your finest Rolls Royce, the silver one with the cream leather interior that you use for special events, and I want you to be my driver." "For Emma's wedding? The one you weren't invited to?" "Especially because I wasn't invited to it." That's how I found myself Saturday morning, dressed in a stunning navy blue Valentino dress that I'd bought with my own hard-earned money, not family inheritance money like everyone else's designer clothes, sitting in the back of, a pristine Rolls-Royce Phantom as we pulled up to St. Margaret's Cathedral, the same cathedral where our parents had been married 35 years earlier, where grandmother's funeral had been held, where I should have been welcomed as family instead of arriving as an uninvited guest with secrets that could destroy everything they thought they knew about their lives. The wedding was scheduled for 2 o'clock. We arrived at 1:50, just as the last guests were entering the church. Through the tinted windows, I could see my parents greeting Jonathan's supposed family members. Actors he'd hired to play wealthy relatives, I now knew. Emma was probably inside, adjusting her veil and dreaming of her perfect life with her wealthy husband, completely unaware that she was about to become the victim of an elaborate crime. What she didn't know was that her perfect husband was planning to empty her bank accounts during their honeymoon and disappear forever. What my parents didn't know was that their comfortable retirement was built on money stolen from their daughter's inheritance. And what none of them knew was that I had the power to expose every lie, every deception, every injustice that had been done to me over the years. As Pete opened my door and I stepped onto the cathedral steps, I felt a sense of power and purpose I'd never experienced before. In my purse were copies of grandmother's real will, the private investigator's comprehensive report on Jonathan, and a certified check for $50,000, a small fraction of what was rightfully mine, but enough to show everyone exactly who had the real power in this family. The silence that fell over St. Margaret's Cathedral when I walked through those massive oak doors was deafening, the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes and revelations. 200 guests turned in their pews to stare as I made my way. Down the center aisle in my Valentino dress, my heels clicking against the marble floor with each confident step. The sound echoed through the vaulted ceiling like a countdown to something inevitable and explosive. Emma stood at the altar in her flowing white Vera Wang gown, her face transforming from bridal radiance to shock to horror in the span of seconds. My parents, seated in the front row in their formal attire, looked like they'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, they had. The ghost of the daughter they'd tried to erase from this perfect day. But it was Jonathan's expression that told me everything. I needed to know about what was coming next. Pure, undiluted panic flickered across his features before he tried to compose himself. Father Mackenzie, who'd known our family for decades and had baptized both Emma and me, paused mid-sentence in his ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could, just have a moment." His voice trailed off as I continued walking toward the altar, my eyes locked on my sister's, carrying with me the power to change everything. "Emma," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's perfect acoustics, reaching every corner where our family's friends and Jonathan's hired actors sat in stunned silence. "I'm sorry to interrupt your special day, but there's something you need to know before you say, 'I do,' something that could save your life." My mother shot to her feet like she'd been launched from a cannon, her perfectly applied makeup and elegant mother-of-the-bride outfit unable to hide the fury radiating from her. "Harper, what are you doing? This is completely inappropriate, even for you. Please leave immediately before you embarrass this family any further." But I was done being dismissed by my family. Done being treated like the problematic daughter, who couldn't just be happy for others. Done accepting their narrative that my success and intelligence were character flaws to be managed rather than gifts to be celebrated. I turned to address the entire congregation, my voice strong and clear, carrying the authority of someone who finally understood her own worth. "My name is Harper Rodriguez, and I'm Emma's sister. I wasn't invited to this wedding because my family thought I might cause problems or make a scene. Well, they were right about one thing. I am about to cause problems, but not for the reasons they think, and not for the person they expect. I reached into my purse and pulled out the thick private investigator's report, its official letterhead, visible to the first few rows of guests. Emma, the man you're about to marry isn't who he claims to be. Jonathan Whitmore isn't a wealthy investment banker. He doesn't have a trust fund or a family fortune. He doesn't own a Rolls-Royce or a family estate in Connecticut. He's a part-time insurance salesman who's been lying to you about everything. And what's worse, he's been planning to rob you blind. The gasps from the congregation were audible, rippling through the cathedral like waves. Emma's face went white beneath her carefully applied makeup. Harper, what are you talking about? Stop this right now. You're ruining everything. The ring on your finger isn't a 5-carat diamond. It's cubic zirconia from a wholesale supplier in Manhattan. The car he supposedly bought you belongs to his uncle's rental company. The expensive gifts, the lavish dates, the promises of a luxurious life. All of it paid for with maxed-out credit cards and borrowed money. And most importantly, I held up copies of airline tickets and email communications. He has a plane ticket to Brazil scheduled for next week under the fake name James Morrison, and he's been planning to drug you on your wedding night and disappear with whatever money he can steal from you. Jonathan finally found his voice, though it cracked with desperation. This is insane, Emma. Don't listen to her. She's jealous because her own engagement fell apart so spectacularly. She can't stand to see you happy and successful, so she's making up these ridiculous lies to destroy your wedding day. But I was ready for his denial. I'd spent 2 days preparing for this moment, gathering evidence that would be impossible to dispute, building a case that would stand up in court if necessary. What I hadn't expected was how empowering it would feel to finally be the one holding all the cards, to be the person with the truth instead of the person being lied to. Uncle Pete. I called toward the back of the church where my uncle was, waiting with the additional evidence we'd prepared. Would you please bring in the items from the car? My uncle, dressed in his best suit and carrying himself with the dignity of a man who'd built his own empire, walked down the aisle carrying a large manila envelope and a small wooden box. The congregation watched in stunned silence as he handed them to me with a nod of support and solidarity. This envelope contains photographs of Jonathan getting out of his Honda Civic at his Queens apartment building, copies of his credit reports showing he's $30,000 in debt, employment records proving he works part-time at Reliable Insurance Services for $12 an hour, and documentation of his plan to flee the country after robbing my sister. I opened the envelope and spread several photographs on the altar steps where everyone could see them clearly. Emma stepped closer to examine the photographs, her wedding dress rustling around her feet like whispered secrets. I watched her face change as she recognized the man in the pictures, the same man standing beside her in a rented tuxedo, trying to look like the wealthy prince she thought she was marrying, the man who'd spent months convincing her that he was her ticket to a life of luxury and security. These aren't real, Emma whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She was staring at a photograph of Jonathan in a Reliable Insurance polo shirt, standing next to a company sign, looking nothing like the Wall Street executive he'd claimed to be. Emma, honey, don't let her ruin this for you, my mother said, moving toward the altar with the protective instincts of a woman watching her daughter's dreams crumble in real time. Harper is just upset about her own failed relationship with Marcus. She's trying to sabotage your happiness because she can't have her own. But I wasn't finished. The small wooden box Uncle Pete had brought contained something that would shift the entire dynamic of this confrontation, something that would prove I wasn't the jealous, problematic sister they'd painted me as, but the one person in this family who'd been wronged for over 2 decades while trying to protect everyone else. Actually, Mom, let's talk about sabotage for a moment. Let's talk about lies and deception and stealing from family members. I opened the wooden box and pulled out copies of Grandmother's real will, the legal documents that would change everything. They thought they knew about our family's finances. This is our grandmother's actual will, dated 6 months before she died. The will that was never submitted to probate court because Dad decided to hide it. My father's face went ashen, the color draining from his cheeks as he realized what I was holding and what it meant for everything they'd built their lives around. He knew exactly what those documents contained, because he'd made the conscious choice to hide them years earlier. According to this legal document, grandmother left her entire estate to me. Not to Dad, not to be split among the family, but specifically to me. The house you've been living in for the past 5 years belongs to me. The investment portfolio funding your comfortable retirement is mine. The money that paid for Emma's college education, her apartment deposits, her car payments, all of it should have been mine to distribute as I saw fit. The silence in the cathedral was absolute now, broken only by the sound of someone's phone buzzing and the distant traffic outside. Even Jonathan had stopped protesting, too shocked by this revelation to maintain his desperate act of innocence. For 23 years, this family has been living off my inheritance while treating me like I was the problem child. You excluded me from this wedding because you thought I was selfish and attention-seeking, when the truth is, I'm the only person grandmother trusted with our family's future. I'm the only one she believed had the wisdom and strength to make difficult decisions for the good of everyone. I turned back to Emma, my voice softening slightly as I addressed the sister I'd always loved, despite everything that had happened between us. I didn't come here to hurt you, Em. I came here to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life, and to finally claim what's rightfully mine so I can protect this family the way grandmother intended. Emma was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks as she looked back and forth between the photographs of Jonathan's real life and the will that proved everything she'd believed about our family's dynamics was wrong. The fairy tale life she'd thought she was marrying into was crumbling around her, but she was also seeing her sister in a completely different light for the first time in decades. "Is it true?" she asked Jonathan, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with the weight of dawning realization. "Are you really planning to leave me? To drug me and steal from me?" Jonathan's composure finally cracked completely, his mask of charm and sophistication falling away to reveal the desperate criminal underneath. "Emma, I can explain everything. This isn't what it looks like. Your sister is manipulating the evidence, hiring people to create fake documents. She's been jealous of us from the beginning." But I had one more revelation that would make his explanation impossible. One final piece of evidence that would expose not just his financial deception, but the cruelest and most dangerous part of his plan. The part that proved Emma wasn't just marrying a liar, she was about to become the victim of a violent crime. "Emma, check his jacket pocket, the inside left pocket of his tuxedo." She hesitated, her hands shaking as she processed what I was asking her to do. Then, with a courage I'd never seen from her before, she reached into Jonathan's jacket. Her face went white as she pulled out a small amber bottle of sleeping pills and a syringe, the tools he'd planned to use to incapacitate her on what should have been the most beautiful night of her life. "He was planning to drug you on your wedding night and steal your credit cards, your jewelry, and whatever cash you had access to before disappearing to Brazil." The private investigator found the plan outlined in emails between Jonathan and his accomplice. "You weren't just going to wake up abandoned in a hotel room in Tuscany. You were going to wake up robbed of everything you owned and possibly worse." That was the moment Emma finally understood that her sister hadn't come to ruin her wedding out of jealousy or spite. I'd come to save her life, to protect her from a predator who'd been planning to destroy her in the cruelest way possible. The chaos that erupted in St. Margaret's Cathedral after Emma found those sleeping pills was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed, even in my years of corporate litigation where emotions ran high and fortunes were won and lost. Jonathan lunged forward desperately, trying to grab the syringe from Emma's trembling hands, but Uncle Pete and 2 of the groomsmen, who turned out to be Jonathan's hired actors, finally breaking character when faced with evidence of actual criminal intent, restrained him immediately. Emma stumbled backward, her elaborate wedding dress catching on the altar rail as she stared in horror at the evidence of her fiancé's plan to drug and rob her. The white silk and lace that should have represented purity and new beginnings now seemed like a costume in a nightmare she couldn't escape. "You don't understand," Jonathan shouted, struggling against the men holding him, his voice cracking with desperation and rage. "This isn't what you think it is. Those aren't mine. She planted them. Harper is trying to frame me because she's obsessed with destroying our happiness. She's been stalking us for months. but his desperate lies were falling apart as quickly as he could speak them, each word making him sound more unhinged and dangerous. Father Mackenzie had already called the police, his voice shaking as he spoke into his cell phone. Guests were pulling out their phones to record the scene, and I could hear murmurs rippling through the congregation as people tried to process what they were witnessing. Emma's fairy tale wedding had become a criminal investigation in real time, and there was no going back to the illusion of perfection that had brought us all here. "Emma, sweetheart, are you okay?" I moved toward my sister, extending my hand in an offer of support, but she held up her own hand to stop me, her eyes wild with shock and confusion. "Don't." Her voice was shaky but fierce, carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "Just don't touch me right now. I need a minute to process this. I need to understand what's happening." My mother was crying now, her perfectly applied makeup running down her cheeks in dark streams, her elegant mother-of-the-bride outfit unable to hide the devastation radiating from her entire being. "How could you do this to your sister? How could you humiliate her like this in front of everyone we know? This is supposed to be the happiest day of her life." The accusation hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making my chest tight with fury. Even after everything I'd just revealed, the proof that I'd saved Emma from being drugged and robbed, the evidence of the family's financial deception that had stolen my inheritance, the documentation of Jonathan's elaborate criminal conspiracy, my mother was still blaming me for the chaos, still painting me as the problem instead of the solution. "Mom, I saved her life," I said, my voice rising to carry over the noise of the crowd. "I exposed a criminal who was planning to drug your daughter and steal everything from her. I prevented her from being left unconscious and robbed in a foreign country with no way to get home. How is that humiliating, Emma?" "You could have told us privately." Mom shot back, her voice shrill with defensive anger. "You didn't have to make a public spectacle in front of 200 people. You could have called us, sent us the evidence, handled this like a mature adult instead of storming in here like some kind of avenging angel." And there it was, the same pattern that had defined my entire relationship with my family for as long as I could remember. No matter what I did, no matter how right I was, no matter how much I sacrificed to protect them, I was always the problem. I was always the one who should have handled things differently, been more considerate, caused less disruption to their carefully constructed illusions. But this time was different. This time, I had evidence that proved I wasn't the selfish daughter they'd painted me as for decades. This time, I had the power to change the narrative once and for all, to force them to see who I really was and what I'd been enduring while they lived off my stolen inheritance. "You want to talk about making scenes, Mom? Let's talk about the scene Dad made when he committed probate fraud by hiding Grandmother's real will. Let's talk about the scene you've all been making for 23 years by living off money that legally belongs to me while treating me like I'm the family disappointment. Let's talk about the scene you made by excluding me from my own sister's wedding because you thought my success made me somehow less deserving of love and respect." My father finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Harper, this isn't the time or place for this discussion. We can talk about the will situation privately, as a family." "When is the time, Dad?" I demanded, my voice echoing through the cathedral with all the power and authority I'd been denied for decades. "When would be convenient for you to explain why you've been stealing my inheritance for over 2 decades? When would be a good moment to discuss why you decided Grandmother's wishes didn't matter as much as your own comfort and convenience?" The police arrived then, their presence adding an official gravity to the situation that made everything feel more real and irreversible. As they began questioning Jonathan and collecting evidence, I watched my family's reaction to the unfolding drama with a mixture of vindication and sadness. Emma was still in shock, standing at the altar in her wedding dress while her criminal fiancé was being handcuffed. My parents were huddled together, whispering frantically about damage control and family reputation, still more concerned about appearances than truth. But something else was happening in that cathedral that I hadn't expected. The guests, many of whom had known our family for years through business, social, and church connections, were seeing the truth about our family dynamics for the first time. They were witnessing how my parents blamed me for exposing Jonathan's crimes instead of thanking me for protecting Emma. They were hearing about the hidden will and the stolen inheritance. They were seeing that the family narrative about Harper being the difficult daughter was completely false. Mrs. Patterson, who'd known our family since Emma and I were children, approached me with tears in her eyes. "Harper, honey, I had no idea what you've been going through. What you did today took incredible courage. Your grandmother would be so proud of you." Detective Sarah Martinez approached me as the other officers finished processing the scene. She was a woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of the best senior partners at my law firm. "Ms. Rodriguez, we're going to need a full statement about how you obtained this information about Mr. Whitmore's plans." "Of course. I have copies of all the documentation at my apartment, including the private investigator's report and the communications he intercepted that detail the criminal conspiracy. You may have saved your sister from serious harm. According to our preliminary investigation, Mr. Whitmore has done this before. We found evidence linking him to at least 3 other women he scammed using similar methods over the past 18 months. Emma overheard this exchange and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger or embarrassment, but something that looked almost like respect mixed with dawning understanding. "Harper," she said quietly, approaching me for the first time since the confrontation began. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the absolute truth." "Always," I replied, meeting her eyes directly. "Did you really come here? Just to save me? Or was part of this about the will and getting back at Mom and Dad for how they've treated you?" It was a fair question, and she deserved an honest answer. I'd spent years being accused of having ulterior motives for my actions, of being selfish and manipulative, so I understood why she might doubt my intentions even now. "Both," I said without hesitation. "I came here because I couldn't let you marry someone who was planning to drug and rob you. That was my primary concern, protecting you from serious harm. But I also came here because I was tired of being treated like the problem child when I'm actually the one person in this family who's been trying to do the right thing for decades." Emma nodded slowly, processing my words. "The sleeping pills. Were you absolutely certain about that part?" The private investigator intercepted emails between Jonathan and his accomplice, where they detailed the entire plan. Drug you on the wedding night, steal your credit cards and jewelry, clean out whatever bank accounts they could access, and disappear before you woke up. You would have been stranded in Italy with no money, no identification, and no way to get home safely. For the first time, Emma's anger seemed to shift completely away from me and toward the man who had been planning to destroy her life in the most cruel and calculated way possible. And his family? The people I've been trying so hard to impress for months? Actors. Paid performers hired to play wealthy relatives and create the illusion of old Connecticut money. The whole thing was an elaborate con designed to make you trust him completely and give him access to your finances and personal information. Emma sank into the front pew, her elaborate wedding dress spreading around her like a white cloud, the symbol of dreams that had turned into a nightmare. I feel so incredibly stupid. How did I not see any of this? How did I fall for such an obvious lie? Because he's a professional con artist, Em. This isn't your fault. These people are experts at psychological manipulation. They study their targets, learn their vulnerabilities, and exploit them with surgical precision. You weren't stupid. You were targeted by a criminal who's probably been perfecting these techniques for years. My mother approached us then, her face still streaked with tears, but her expression softer than it had been since I'd walked into the cathedral. "Harper, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to blame you for this situation. You protected your sister when we failed to see the danger she was in." It was the first time in my adult life that my mother had admitted she was wrong about something involving me. But I could see in her eyes that she still hadn't fully grasped the bigger picture. She was apologizing for today's events, but not for the decades of treating me as less important than Emma. Not for the financial deception. Not for the pattern of dismissing my concerns and accomplishments as character flaws to be managed rather than gifts to be celebrated. Subblock 1 complete, 5,000 characters. Mom, the apology I need isn't just about today's events, I said, my voice steady but firm. It's about 23 years of being treated like I was the problem when I was actually the solution. It's about you and Dad stealing my inheritance and then acting like I was selfish for being successful with money I earned through my own hard work. It's about being excluded from my own sister's wedding because you thought my achievements somehow made me less deserving of love and respect. The conversation was interrupted by Detective Martinez returning with more questions, but I could see that something fundamental had shifted in my family's dynamics. The truth was out. The evidence was undeniable. And for the first time in my life, I held the power to determine what happened next in our relationships. As the police finished their investigation and began to clear the cathedral, Uncle Pete approached, me with the expression of pride mixed with concern. Harper, you did the right thing today, but this is going to change everything for your family. Are you prepared for what comes next? I've been preparing for this my entire life, Pete. I've been the responsible one, the one who makes hard decisions, the one who protects people even when they don't appreciate it. The only difference now is that everyone can see it. What I didn't know was that the most dramatic revelations were still to come. Because as the police investigation deepened over the following days, they would uncover connections between Jonathan's con operation and someone much closer to my family than any of us had imagined. Someone who had been using information about our family dynamics and financial situation to target not just Emma, but potentially dozens of other women from wealthy Chicago families. The web of deception was about to unravel completely, and when it did, I would finally understand why grandmother had been so specific about leaving everything to me. She hadn't just been rewarding my responsibility and character. She'd been preparing me to save the family from a threat she'd somehow anticipated decades earlier, a threat that would test everything I thought I knew about trust, loyalty, and the price of protecting the people you love. But first, I had to survive the aftermath of today's revelations. I had to navigate the complex process of reclaiming my stolen inheritance, while helping Emma recover from the trauma of discovering that the man she'd planned to spend her life with was actually a predator who'd been planning to destroy her. I had to rebuild relationships with parents who were finally beginning to see me as I really was, rather than as the problem child they'd created in their own minds. As we left the cathedral that afternoon, with Jonathan in police custody and the truth finally exposed, I felt a mixture of vindication and exhaustion that I'd never experienced before. I'd accomplished what I'd set out to do. I'd saved Emma from a dangerous criminal and forced my family to confront the lies they'd been living with for decades. But I also knew that the hardest work was still ahead of us. Rebuilding trust after years of deception is never simple, even when the deception was built on good intentions. My parents would have to confront their own role in hiding grandmother's will and living off money that belonged to me. Emma would have to process the trauma of nearly marrying a man who'd planned to drug and rob her. And I would have to learn how to be part of a family that finally saw me as valuable rather than problematic. The silver Rolls-Royce was waiting for us outside the cathedral, a symbol of the power and resources I'd always had but never been allowed to claim. As Uncle Pete held the door for me, I looked back at the cathedral one last time, thinking about the woman who'd walked through those doors an hour earlier, uninvited, unwanted, carrying secrets that could destroy everything. That woman was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. Someone who would use her inheritance not just to build her own life, but to protect and support the family members who had finally learned to appreciate her strength, rather than fear it. The real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, as we all learned to navigate relationships based on truth, rather than comfortable lies. But for the first time in my life, I was confident that we could build something better than what we'd had before, something based on respect, honesty, and the recognition that sometimes the person everyone thinks is the problem is actually the person with the courage to solve problems that everyone else wants to ignore. As we drove away from St. Margaret's Cathedral, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my assistant. Cancel my meetings for Monday. I need to start planning how to properly manage a family fortune. It was time to claim my rightful place as the head of the Rodriguez family, and I intended to do the job exactly as grandmother had envisioned, with wisdom, strength, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the people I loved, whether they appreciated it or not. 3 days after the wedding disaster, Detective Martinez called me with information that would shake our family to its core once again, and reveal that the conspiracy against us was far more elaborate and personal than any of us had imagined. I was sitting in my office on Tuesday morning, trying to focus on client work while fielding calls from relatives who'd heard about Emma's wedding catastrophe through the Chicago social media grapevine, when the detective's words stopped me cold. Ms. Rodriguez, we need to meet as soon as possible. There's something about the Whitmore case that directly involves your family, and it's much bigger than we initially thought. We've uncovered evidence that suggests your sister wasn't a random target. She was specifically chosen based on detailed intelligence about your family's finances and personal relationships. An hour later, I sat across from Detective Martinez in a downtown coffee shop near my office, watching her spread surveillance photographs across our small table. My blood ran cold as I recognized one of the faces staring back at me from the images. A face that belonged to someone I'd trusted with my most intimate secrets and deepest vulnerabilities. Jonathan Whitmore wasn't working alone, and he wasn't choosing his targets randomly through social media or dating apps like most romance scammers, Detective Martinez explained, her voice grave. His operation was being funded and directed by someone with intimate knowledge of wealthy Chicago families, someone who knew exactly which women had access to significant assets and understood their psychological profiles well enough to design personalized approaches for each victim. She slid a surveillance photograph toward me, and I felt the world tilt on its axis. The image showed Jonathan meeting with a man in an expensive suit outside Morton's Steakhouse downtown, their body language suggesting a business relationship rather than a casual encounter. A man I'd trusted with my career plans, my family secrets, and my deepest insecurities about never being good enough for the people who were supposed to love me. That's Marcus Chen, my ex-fiancé. We've been tracking this operation for 8 months across 3 states. Your ex-fiancé has been running a sophisticated romance scam network, targeting women from prominent families throughout the Midwest. He identifies wealthy women through professional and social connections, studies their backgrounds and emotional vulnerabilities, then deploys operatives like Jonathan to seduce and systematically rob them. The room seemed to spin around me as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Marcus, the man I'd planned to marry, the man I'd trusted with intimate details about my family dynamics and financial situation, the man I'd introduced to our social circle and brought to family gatherings. He'd been running a criminal operation designed to destroy women exactly like me and everyone I cared about. But Marcus never tried to rob me directly, I said weakly, grasping for some explanation that would make this nightmare make sense. Because he discovered something far more valuable than your personal assets, Detective Martinez replied, pulling out a thick file that made my stomach drop. Through your relationship and your position at Morrison & Associates, he gained access to information about dozens of other wealthy families in Chicago's social and business circles. Your sister wasn't his first target. She was just the most recent victim in an operation that's been systematically targeting women, you know. The detective opened the file to reveal a collection of documents that made me feel physically sick. There were detailed profiles of women I'd grown up with, gone to college with, worked with professionally. Each profile contained personal information that could only have come from someone with intimate access to Chicago's legal and social communities. Someone like me. We found records of at least 12 women who've been victimized by this operation over the past 2 years. All wealthy, all from prominent families, all initially identified and researched through intelligence Marcus gathered during his relationship with you. Every family dinner where he charmed your parents. Every social event where he networked with your friends. Every private conversation where you shared details about people you cared about. All of it was reconnaissance for his criminal enterprise. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced, reaching parts of my soul I didn't even know existed. Not only had Marcus cheated on me and humiliated me by ending our engagement in the most public and painful way possible, but he'd used our entire relationship to identify and destroy other women. Every moment of intimacy, every shared confidence, every vulnerable conversation where I'd revealed my fears and insecurities, all of it had been manipulated to gather intelligence for his criminal operation. "Harper, are you okay?" Detective Martinez asked, her professional demeanor softening as she watched me process the magnitude of what she'd revealed. "I need to know everything," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "I need to understand exactly how he used me, exactly what information he gathered, exactly how many people I care about have been hurt because of my trust in him." Detective Martinez spent the next hour walking me through the evidence they'd gathered about Marcus's operation. The sophistication was breathtaking in its cruelty. He'd used our relationship to create detailed psychological and financial profiles of not just my family, but dozens of women in our extended social circle. Information about divorce settlements, inheritance patterns, business partnerships, family conflicts, all gathered through casual conversations and social interactions that I'd believed were genuine expressions of interest in my life and relationships. The operation works in stages, Martinez explained. Marcus identifies potential targets through his relationship with you. Then his team researches their financial situations, relationship histories, and emotional vulnerabilities. They look for women who are recently divorced, dealing with family conflicts, or going through major life transitions that make them more susceptible to romantic manipulation. She showed me photographs of women I recognized: Sarah from my yoga class who'd been through a bitter divorce last year, Jennifer from the university club whose husband had died suddenly, leaving her with substantial assets and no experience managing them independently. All of them had been systematically targeted using information that could only have come from someone with access to our social circle. "We need your help to build the criminal case against Marcus and identify any other potential victims who haven't come forward yet. You know more about his methods and the information he had access to than anyone else." As I walked back to my office that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Can we talk? I've been thinking about everything that happened at the wedding, and I need to apologize properly. Also, the police told me there might be more to this situation than just Jonathan. We met that evening at our old coffee shop near Northwestern University, the place where we used to study together when Emma was struggling through her undergraduate courses, and I was already building my legal career. She looked different somehow. Chagrin, older, more serious, like the events of Saturday had forced her to grow up overnight and confront realities she'd been avoiding her entire adult life. "Harper, I've been absolutely horrible to you for years, and I didn't even realize the full extent of it until I saw how you saved me from Jonathan and learned about everything you've been dealing with," Emma began, her voice thick with emotion. "I let Mom and Dad convince me that you were the selfish one, that you were trying to steal attention from my achievements and make everything about yourself. But the truth is, I was jealous of you in ways I couldn't even admit to myself. Em, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do. I need to say this because I've been thinking about it nonstop since Saturday. I was jealous of you because you worked so hard for everything you accomplished, and I just coasted through life letting other people take care of me, make decisions for me, solve my problems for me. When you tried to give me advice or warn me about potential problems, I saw it as criticism instead of love. I saw it as you trying to prove you were smarter than me instead of you trying to protect me." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This was the conversation I'd been waiting years to have with my sister. The acknowledgement I'd needed, but never expected to receive. "I never wanted to overshadow you, Em. I just wanted to be successful enough that the family would finally see me as valuable instead of viewing my achievements as somehow threatening to family harmony. But you were always valuable, Harper. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy feeling sorry for myself and resentful of your success." Emma reached across the table and took my hand, her grip firm and sincere. When I saw those sleeping pills, when I realized what Jonathan was actually planning to do to me, I finally understood what kind of person you really are. You risked everything to save me. Your relationship with Mom and Dad, your reputation, your own emotional well-being, just to protect me from someone who wanted to destroy my life. You're my sister. Of course I would protect you. But I wouldn't have done the same for you, and that's what makes me so ashamed. If someone had told me Marcus was cheating on you or using you for information, I probably would have stayed out of it because I wouldn't have wanted to get involved in what I saw as drama. Emma's voice broke as she continued. I'm so ashamed of the person I've been, of how I've treated you, of how I've failed to appreciate having a sister who would literally crash a wedding to save me from making the biggest mistake of my life. We talked for over 3 hours that evening, really talked, for the first time since we were children. Emma asked about my career, my goals, my feelings about the family dynamics that had shaped both our lives. She listened without judgment when I told her about the years of feeling like an outsider in my own family, about working twice as hard as everyone else just to be seen as worthy of basic respect and consideration. Harper, I want to ask you something, and please be completely honest with me. The inheritance from grandmother, do you want to take it all back and cut us off? Because legally, it's all yours. And after everything that's happened, after how we've treated you, I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to see any of us again. I'd been thinking about this question for days, weighing my options and considering what grandmother would have wanted me to do with the power she'd given me. I want what grandmother wanted, for the money to be used wisely, to benefit family members who deserve support, and to stop enabling those who would waste it or take it for granted. I don't need all of it for myself, but I do need acknowledgement, that it was always mine to give, and I need real changes in how this family treats me and values my contributions. What does that mean, practically speaking? It means Mom and Dad need to acknowledge what they did, and either move out of the house that legally belongs to me, or pay fair market rent and treat me as their landlord, rather than pretending they own property they've been stealing from me for years. It means the family needs to stop treating my success as a character flaw, and start recognizing that I'm the responsible one who should be consulted on major decisions. And it means you and I need to build a real relationship based on honesty and mutual respect instead of the dynamic where I'm supposed to be grateful for scraps of attention and approval. Emma nodded thoughtfully. I can live with all of that. Actually, I want all of that. I want to be part of a family that values you properly instead of one that makes you feel like you have to prove your worth constantly. That evening, Emma called our parents and arranged a family meeting for the following night. She didn't tell them what it would be about, just that all 4 of us needed to have an honest conversation about the future of our family relationships and the practical implications of everything that had been revealed. The meeting would take place in my parents' living room, the same living room that legally belonged to me, furnished with items purchased using my inheritance, overlooking the garden that grandmother had planted with money that should have funded my own dreams and aspirations. The family meeting took place on Wednesday evening, and the tension in the room was palpable from the moment I walked through the front door. Dad had aged visibly since Saturday's wedding disaster, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something I'd never seen before. Shame mixed with defiance, like a child caught stealing who was still trying to justify his actions and minimize the consequences of his choices. Before we start, Mom said, her voice artificially bright in the way it got when she was trying to control situations that were spiraling beyond her management. I want everyone to know that we're going to handle this like adults. No accusations, no blame, no rehashing of old grievances, just honest conversation about how to move forward as a family. Emma and I exchanged glances across the coffee table. Even now, even after everything that had been exposed and proven with documentation, Mom was still trying to control the narrative and minimize the severity of what had been done. She was still operating under the assumption that family harmony was more important than truth or justice. Actually, Mom, I said calmly, settling into the armchair that I'd unknowingly purchased with my own inheritance money. I think we need to start with acknowledgement and accountability. Dad committed probate fraud by hiding grandmother's real will and submitting a fraudulent document in its place. You both have been living off my inheritance for 23 years while treating me like I was the problematic family member who needed to be managed and contained. Before we talk about moving forward, I need to hear you both admit what you did and take responsibility for the impact it's had on my life." The silence stretched between us like a chasm that had been growing for decades. Dad finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, carrying the weight of guilt he'd been carrying for years. "I didn't submit your grandmother's will because I thought it would tear the family apart permanently." She was angry at Emma for dropping out of college twice and maxing out her credit cards. She was angry at your mother for enabling Emma's spending habits and poor decision-making. "I thought if we just managed the money responsibly and made sure everyone benefited from it, no one would get hurt and the family would stay together." "But I did get hurt, Dad," I replied, my voice steady but firm. "For over 2 decades, I've been made to feel like my success was somehow selfish, like my achievements were character flaws that needed to be downplayed to protect other people's feelings. You made me believe I was too much, too difficult, too demanding, when the truth is I was the only one grandmother trusted to handle responsibility and make difficult decisions for the family's benefit." "We never meant to make you feel that way," Mom interjected, her voice defensive despite her earlier promises about avoiding blame and accusations. "We were proud of you. We just didn't want Emma to feel overshadowed or inadequate. We thought we were protecting both of you by managing the inheritance situation quietly. So, instead of protecting me, you overshadowed me," I continued, feeling years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. "You took my inheritance and used it to prop up Emma's lifestyle while making me feel guilty for working hard and being financially successful with money I earned through my own efforts. Do you understand how that affected me psychologically? Do you understand why I've spent my entire adult life trying to prove I'm worthy of basic respect and consideration from my own family?" Emma reached over and took my hand in a gesture of support that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. "Mom, Dad, Harper saved my life on Saturday. While you were worried about me being embarrassed in front of wedding guests, she was protecting me from being drugged and robbed by a criminal who was planning to destroy my life. Instead of thanking her for her courage and investigative work, you blamed her for causing a scene. That's not okay, and it's part of a pattern that needs to change." But I wasn't finished with the revelations that needed to be shared. Detective Martinez had called again that morning with additional information that would change everything about this conversation and our understanding of the threats our family had been facing. "There's something else you need to know," I said, pulling out my phone to show them the photographs Detective Martinez had shared. Detective Martinez called today with an update about Marcus and Jonathan's operation that directly involves all of us. Dad looked confused, still not understanding the full scope of what we were dealing with. "What does Marcus have to do with any of this? I thought this was about Emma's fiancé being a con artist. Marcus has been running the entire romance scam operation that targeted Emma. He's been using information he gathered through our relationship to identify and rob women from wealthy families throughout Chicago and the surrounding areas. The detective estimates that at least 12 women have been victimized using intelligence Marcus collected through his connection to me and our social circle." The room went deadly quiet as the implications of what I was saying began to sink, and Mom's face went white as she processed the idea that someone she'd welcomed into our home, someone she'd grown fond of during our engagement, had been systematically plotting against our family and our friends. "But there's more," I continued, knowing this would be the hardest part for them to accept. "The police found financial records and surveillance evidence showing that Marcus has been investigating our family's assets for over a year. He knows about the house, the investment portfolio, the inheritance situation, everything. Based on his established pattern of behavior, Detective Martinez believes our family was being positioned as his next major target." "What do you mean, next target?" Dad asked, though I could see in his eyes that he was beginning to understand the scope of the danger we'd been in without realizing it. "Marcus has been positioning himself to gain access to what he believed was my share of the family money. The detective thinks his original plan was to marry me, gain legal access to the inheritance through our marriage, then disappear with everything he could steal. When I broke up with him after discovering his affair, he moved to Plan B, targeting Emma directly through Jonathan and trying to access the family assets through her marriage. The full scope of the threat was starting to dawn on them, but I could see they still didn't fully grasp how close we'd all come to financial ruin. Marcus hadn't just been cheating on me. He'd been conducting surveillance on our entire family for over a year, mapping our assets, studying our relationships, planning to destroy us systematically and completely. Detective Martinez wants to use our family as bait to catch Marcus in the act of attempting to access our accounts, I continued, watching their faces as they process this information. They want to let him think his plan is still viable, then arrest him when he makes his move. But participating in a sting operation would require all of us to work together and follow law enforcement protocols exactly. Absolutely not, Mommy said immediately, her voice sharp with fear and denial. We've been through enough drama and public humiliation. We're not getting involved in some dangerous police sting operation that could put us all at risk. And there it was again, the same pattern that had defined my entire relationship with my family for decades. When faced with a crisis that required courage, decisive action, and personal risk for the greater good, they wanted to hide and hope the problem would go away on its own. Mom, he's not going to stop targeting us or people we care about, I explained, trying to keep my frustration in check. The detective says his operation has been escalating in scope and sophistication. Each con gets bigger, more elaborate, more dangerous. Emma was lucky that I discovered Jonathan's plan before the wedding. The next woman he targets might not be so fortunate, and it could easily be someone else we know and care about. But why should that be our responsibility? Dad asked, his voice carrying the same avoidance of difficult decisions that had led him to hide grandmother's will in the first place. We didn't ask to be involved in this criminal situation. Because we are involved whether we asked for it or not, I replied firmly. Marcus targeted our family specifically because of his relationship with me. He used my trust, my love, my intimate knowledge of all of you to plan crimes against other women. I have a moral obligation to help stop him, and frankly, you all have an obligation to support that effort since you've been living off my stolen inheritance for over 2 decades. Emma spoke up with a courage that surprised everyone in the room. I want to help with the sting operation. Emma, no, Mom protested immediately. You've been through enough trauma with this Jonathan situation. You don't need to put yourself at additional risk. Mom, Harper risked everything to save me from Jonathan. She could have stayed quiet, let me make my mistake, and watched my life fall apart from a safe distance. Instead, she crashed my wedding and exposed herself to family criticism and public scrutiny just to protect me. The least I can do is help her stop Marcus from hurting other women the way he was planning to hurt us. I looked at my sister with new respect and genuine affection. The old Emma would have hidden from this kind of responsibility, would have let other people handle the difficult and dangerous decisions. But the woman sitting next to me was showing real moral courage for the first time in her life. There's one more thing we need to discuss, I said, knowing this would be the most challenging part of the conversation. If we're going to do this, if we're going to work together as a family to stop Marcus and protect other potential victims, then things have to change between us permanently. I'm not going back to being the daughter who apologizes for her success and accepts scraps of respect, while pretending everything is fine. What exactly are you asking for? Dad said, his voice wary, but more respectful than it had been in years. I'm asking for what grandmother wanted when she left me that inheritance. I want to be treated as the responsible adult in this family, who should be consulted on major decisions. I want control over family finances since it's legally my money anyway. I want an end to the dynamic where Emma gets coddled and protected while I get criticized for exhibiting the same behaviors. And I want acknowledgement that I've been right about most of the important things you've dismissed or minimized over the years. That sounds like you want to control the entire family, Mom said defensively, falling back on old patterns of resistance to my leadership. No, I want to protect the family, the same way I protected Emma on Saturday, and the same way I'm trying to protect all of us from Marcus right now. Grandmother left me the inheritance because she knew I would use it wisely and have the courage to stand up to people who would harm us. That's exactly what I've been doing my entire adult life, and it's exactly what I plan to keep doing whether you appreciate it or not. The conversation continued for another 2 hours, with moments of real progress punctuated by old patterns of defensiveness, blame shifting, and resistance to change. But by the end of the evening, we had reached a preliminary agreement that felt like the beginning of something genuinely different. Dad would transfer the house deed into my name and begin paying market rate rent. The investment portfolio would be moved to accounts under my control. Most importantly, the family would support the police sting operation to catch Marcus and prevent him from victimizing other women. What none of us knew was that Marcus was already planning his next move, and it would be bolder and more dangerous than anything he'd attempted before. Detective Martinez would call the following morning with intelligence, suggesting that Marcus had become aware of the police investigation and was accelerating his timeline. Instead of waiting months to execute his plan against our family, he was preparing to make his move within days. The stakes were about to get much higher, and the test of our family's new dynamic would come sooner and more dramatically than any of us had anticipated. But for the first time in my life, I felt confident that we could face whatever challenges came our way. We had truth on our side, legal documentation to support our position, and most importantly, we finally had a family structure based on reality, rather than comfortable illusions. As I drove home that night, I thought about the woman I'd been just a week earlier, desperate for family approval, convinced that my success was somehow a character flaw, willing to accept minimal respect from people who should have been celebrating my achievements. That woman felt like a stranger to me now, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to compromise her values for the sake of maintaining false peace. The real test would come in the days ahead, when we would have to work together, under pressure to help law enforcement catch a dangerous criminal who had been systematically targeting our family and our social circle. But I was ready for that test, and for the first time in decades, I believed my family might be ready too. The sting operation began 3 weeks later, and it unfolded more dramatically than even Detective Martinez had anticipated. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its risks. I would pretend to reconcile with Marcus, let him think he was successfully manipulating me back into the relationship, then catch him in the act of attempting to steal from my family's accounts. What we didn't expect was how quickly Marcus would escalate once he thought he had access to millions of dollars, or how personal and vindictive his final plan would become. The reunion happened at Gibson's Steakhouse, the same restaurant where Marcus had proposed to me 10 months earlier in what I now knew had been a calculated move to gain legal access to what he believed was my inheritance. I wore the sapphire earrings he'd given me for my birthday, the ones I now knew he'd probably stolen from another victim, and played the role of the heartbroken ex-fiancé desperate for another chance at love and financial security. "Harper, you look absolutely incredible," Marcus said, his smile as charming and manipulative as ever. The recording device hidden in my purse was capturing every word, every inflection, every lie he was about to tell me. "I've missed you so much." Breaking up was the biggest mistake of my life. "I've missed you too," I lied, letting vulnerability and longing creep into my voice in exactly the way he'd trained me to do during our relationship. The breakup, everything with Emma's wedding disaster, it's made me realize what's really important. Family, love, building a secure future together. Marcus leaned forward across the white tablecloth, his eyes bright with predatory interest disguised as romantic devotion. "I heard about what happened with Emma and that Jonathan character. That must have been absolutely devastating for your entire family." It was, but it also brought us closer together in unexpected ways. We've been having difficult conversations about family finances, about combining our resources, and making sure something like that never happens to any of us again. I paused, letting him think I was about to reveal something confidential and valuable. My parents have been talking about signing over power of attorney for all the family accounts to me. After grandmother's will revelation, they finally realize I'm the most qualified person to manage everything and protect us from future threats." The predatory gleam in Marcus's eyes was unmistakable. Exactly what Detective Martinez had predicted would happen when presented with the prospect of accessing millions of dollars. "That's an enormous amount of responsibility, Harper. You shouldn't have to handle all of that financial complexity alone." "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Marcus, I know we had problems before, but I've realized that I need someone I can trust completely. Someone who understands finance and legal structures. Someone who can help me protect my family from people who would take advantage of us." Over the course of our 2-hour dinner, I watched Marcus construct his trap in real time, each suggestion and offer carefully calculated to position himself as my protector and advisor. He suggested we take things slowly, rebuild our relationship, on a foundation of trust and mutual support. He offered to help me set up better security protocols for the family accounts. He even proposed that we plan a small, intimate wedding ceremony. Just family and close friends. Nothing like the elaborate affair we'd originally planned before I discovered his infidelity. Everything he said was designed to gain my trust and access to information about family assets, to position himself as the solution to problems he'd actually created. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, and if I hadn't known exactly what he was doing, if I hadn't been working with law enforcement to document his crimes, I might have fallen for it all over again. "There is one thing I'm worried about," I said as we finished our dessert and moved toward the moment when I would spring the trap Detective Martinez had designed. The private investigator I hired to look into Jonathan found some concerning connections. Apparently, this kind of romance scam operation is more common than people think, and sometimes the criminals have inside information about their targets. Marcus's face remained perfectly composed, but I caught the slight tension in his shoulders, the micro-expression that revealed he was calculating how to respond to this potential threat to his operation. What kind of connections did they find? Well, they think Jonathan was working with someone who had inside knowledge about our family, someone who knew about our financial situation, our social connections, our personal vulnerabilities. I leaned closer, lowering my voice to create false intimacy. "Detective Martinez thinks it might be someone we know personally, someone who's been gathering intelligence for months or even years." "That's absolutely terrifying, Harper. You need to be really careful about who you trust with sensitive information." The irony of receiving trust advice from the man who was actively planning to rob me was almost overwhelming, but I maintained my performance perfectly. This was the moment Detective Martinez had prepared me for, the moment when Marcus would reveal the true scope of his operation. "I know. That's why I'm so grateful to have you back in my life. I need someone who genuinely cares about me as a person, not just what I can provide financially." By the end of the evening, Marcus had taken the bait completely. We made plans to meet again the following week, ostensibly to discuss our future together, but actually to give him another opportunity to gather intelligence about the family finances and reveal more details about his criminal network. The second meeting was where Marcus revealed the true scope of his operation and sealed his own fate. We met at his apartment in Lincoln Park, the same place where I'd once felt safe and loved, now transformed into enemy territory where I was working undercover for law enforcement. Detective Martinez and her team were monitoring from a van across the street, recording everything through the sophisticated wire I was wearing. "I've been thinking about what you said last week," Marcus began, pouring wine into glasses I recognized from our relationship, glasses that had probably been purchased with money stolen from his victims, "about needing help protecting your family's assets from people who would take advantage of your trust." "I'm so glad, because the situation is getting complicated very quickly. My parents want to transfer everything into my name within the next month. We're talking about $12 million in total. The house, the investment portfolio, some properties I didn't even know existed until we started going through grandmother's estate planning documents." Marcus tried to hide his excitement, but I could see the dollar signs calculating in his eyes, could practically hear him planning how to access and steal everything my family had worked generations to build. $12 million. Harper, that's an enormous responsibility. You're going to need professional help managing all of that complexity. That's exactly what I was thinking. Someone I trust completely. Someone who could maybe even be a co-signer on some of the accounts for security purposes, and to help with major financial decisions. I would be honored to help you with something that important, Marcus said, moving closer to me on the couch where we'd once shared genuinely intimate moments. But we should probably make our relationship official again before taking on that kind of financial partnership. And there it was, the proposal that would seal his fate and provide law enforcement with the evidence they needed to destroy his entire criminal network. Marcus pulled out a ring box, the same box that had contained my original engagement ring, though I suspected this might be a different ring stolen from another victim. Harper Rodriguez, I know I made mistakes before, but I love you more than anything in this world. Will you marry me again? Will you let me help you protect your family and build the life we always dreamed about together? I looked into his eyes, seeing not the man I'd once loved, but the predator who had used my trust to identify and destroy other women. The man who had turned my sister's wedding into a crime scene. The man who was planning to drug me on our honeymoon and disappear with millions of dollars that belonged to my family. Yes, I said, letting tears of false joy well up in my eyes. Yes, Marcus, I'll marry you. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I gave the subtle signal that would bring Detective Martinez and her team through the front door. Within seconds, the apartment was filled with police officers, and Marcus Chen was being arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, racketeering, and operating a criminal enterprise across state lines. The look of shock and betrayal on his face was almost comical. Harper, what's happening? What's going on? What's going on is that you're under arrest for running a romance scam operation that has victimized at least 15 women over the past 3 years, Detective Martinez said as she read him his rights. Your ex-fiancé has been working with us for weeks to gather evidence of your crimes. Marcus stared at me in disbelief, his mask of charm and manipulation finally falling away completely. You set me up. I protected my family and stopped you from hurting more women, I corrected. Just like I protected Emma from Jonathan. Just like I've been protecting people my whole life while everyone else told me I was the problem. As the police led Marcus away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of vindication and justice unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For the first time in my life, everyone could see that I wasn't the difficult daughter who caused problems. I was the strong daughter who solved them, who had the courage to do what needed to be done even when it was dangerous and difficult. 3 months later, I stood in the ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel, accepting the Chicago Bar Association's award for outstanding pro bono service and community protection. The case against Marcus had led to the arrest of 12 accomplices across 3 states and the recovery of over $3 million stolen from victims throughout the Midwest. More importantly, our investigation had saved an estimated 23 women from becoming targets of their sophisticated criminal operation. This recognition belongs not just to me, but to every woman who found the courage to come forward and help us build this case, I said into the microphone, looking out at an audience that included my entire family sitting proudly in the front row. Sometimes protecting the people we love requires us to do difficult things, to make unpopular choices, to stand up when others would rather stay quiet. Sometimes being called too much by your family actually means you're exactly enough to save them. Emma was sitting in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she listened to her sister being recognized for heroism instead of criticized for causing problems. She'd spent the past 3 months rebuilding her life with a courage and independence I'd never seen from her before. She'd moved out of our parents' house, found a meaningful job at a nonprofit organization that helped financial crime victims recover their lives, and started therapy to work through the trauma of almost marrying a man who planned to drug and rob her. My parents were there too, looking older, but somehow more at peace than I'd seen them in years. The process of acknowledging what they'd done with grandmother's will, transferring the assets back to my control, and learning to see me as the family's protector rather than its problem had been difficult and sometimes painful for all of us. But it had also freed them from decades of guilt and financial stress they'd been carrying without even realizing it. After the ceremony, we gathered for dinner at Alinea, my treat using money from my rightfully reclaimed inheritance. It was the first time in my adult life that a family celebration had been organized around my achievement rather than someone else's, and the difference in energy and dynamics was remarkable. "I have something to say," Dad announced as we finished our appetizers, his voice carrying a gravity and sincerity I rarely heard from him. "Harper, I owe you an apology that's 23 years overdue. Your grandmother was absolutely right to trust you with our family's future. You've proven over and over that you're the strongest, most responsible, most ethically grounded person among us, and instead of celebrating those qualities, we made you feel like they were character flaws that needed to be managed. Dad, I don't have to. Yes, I do. I need to say this publicly, in front of our family, so there's no ambiguity about where I stand. I stole your inheritance because I was afraid of change. Afraid of admitting that my mother saw things more clearly than I did. Afraid of having difficult conversations about responsibility and worthiness. I convinced myself I was protecting the family, but really I was protecting my own pride and avoiding my own discomfort with conflict." Mom reached across the table and took my hand, her grip firm and warm in a way that felt genuinely affectionate rather than performative. "Harper, I spent so many years worried that you would outshine Emma that I forgot to celebrate how bright your light really is. You saved your sister's life. You saved our family's financial security. And you probably saved dozens of other women from being victimized by dangerous criminals. I'm proud to be your mother, and I'm sorry it took me so long to say that clearly." Emma raised her glass of champagne, her voice strong and clear as she spoke. "To my sister, who taught me that being strong isn't the same as being mean, and that sometimes love means doing the hard thing instead of the easy thing. You didn't just save me from Jonathan. You saved me from a lifetime of being weak and dependent and afraid of taking responsibility for my own choices." As we clinked glasses, I felt a warmth and sense of belonging I'd never experienced before. The sensation of being truly seen and valued by my family for who I actually was, not who they thought I should be or who they needed me to be to make them feel comfortable. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling an envelope from my purse. "I've been thinking about grandmother's will and what she really wanted when she left me that inheritance. She trusted me to use it wisely, but that doesn't mean I have to use it alone or that it can't benefit the people I love." I handed Emma a document that made her eyes fill with tears as she read it. "I'm setting up a foundation in grandmother's name to help women who've been victims of financial crimes and domestic abuse. I want you to run it, Em. You understand now what it feels like to be targeted and manipulated, and you have the compassion and strength to help other women rebuild their lives and find their own power." Emma's voice was thick with emotion as she responded, "Harper, this is incredible. But are you sure? This represents a significant portion of your inheritance. It's our family's money, and this is how I want our family to use it, to protect people who need protection, to support people who are finding their strength, to make sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else if we can prevent it." The evening ended with something that had never happened before in our family. A group hug that felt completely genuine and unforced. No hidden resentments, no unspoken competitions, no power struggles over who mattered most, or who deserved more attention. Just 4 people who had finally learned to see each other clearly and value each other appropriately. As I drove home to my condo that night, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, desperate for family approval, convinced that my success was somehow a character flaw, willing to accept scraps of affection from people who should have been celebrating my achievements. That woman felt like a stranger to me now, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and demanded the respect she deserved. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Martinez. "Saw the news coverage of your award ceremony tonight. Couldn't be prouder to have worked with you. Marcus got 15 years federal prison, by the way. Justice served, and you made it possible." I smiled, thinking about how different my life might have been if I'd never found that mysterious note under my door never hired the private investigator, never crashed Emma's wedding with the truth about Jonathan. I could have stayed quiet, accepted my exclusion from the family, let Emma marry a man who planned to destroy her life, and never discovered that my own ex-fiancé was the mastermind behind it all. But that's not who I am. I'm Harper Rodriguez, the daughter my grandmother trusted with our family's future. I'm the sister who risks everything to protect the people she loves. I'm the woman who stands up to predators and fights for justice, even when it's difficult, and messy and uncomfortable. 3 months ago, my family saw me as the problem child who couldn't just be happy for others. Tonight, they see me as the hero who saved them from destruction they didn't even know was coming. The transformation isn't just in how they see me, it's in how I see myself. I'm not too much. I'm not too difficult. I'm not too demanding or attention-seeking or selfish. I'm exactly as strong and successful and protective as my family needs me to be. And for the first time in my life, they're grateful for all of it, instead of threatened by it. As I pulled into my parking garage, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Tomorrow, I would call the realtor about looking at houses, not because I needed more space, but because I wanted to build something new. A home where family gatherings would celebrate achievements instead of diminishing them, where success would be seen as a gift to be shared rather than a threat to be contained. The Harper who used to apologize for her accomplishments was gone forever. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, demanded the respect she deserved, and used her strength to protect the people who mattered most. And if anyone in my family ever tried to make me feel like the problem again, they would discover that the woman who exposed Jonathan's plan and brought down Marcus's criminal operation was just getting started. Sometimes the best way to show people who you really are is to stop pretending to be who they want you to be. Sometimes love means refusing to accept less than you deserve, even from family. And sometimes the daughter everyone thinks is the problem is actually the solution the family has been waiting for all along. The mysterious note that started this entire journey had been signed, "A Concerned Friend," and I never did discover who sent it. But as I sat in my car that night, surrounded by the city lights of Chicago and feeling more at peace than I'd ever felt in my life, I realized it didn't matter who had warned me about Jonathan. What mattered was that I'd found the courage to act on that warning, to trust my instincts, and to fight for my family even when they didn't think they wanted me to fight for them. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and standing up for what's right? Have you found the courage to demand the respect you deserve from people who claim to love you but treated you as less than you were worth? I'd love to hear your stories of finding your strength and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Because sometimes sharing these experiences helps us all understand that we're not alone in the fight to be seen and valued for who we really are.